In the first sermon of the Buddha, which was the sermon given to the 5 ascetics, it's called the Damma Pavattana Sutra. One very important thing that the Buddha said was that there are 2 extreme ways of living. That all people are troubled by this. It's not only some people in the world, all people are faced with this problem. Today, most people who hear about this, they don't understand this. The 2 extremes usually translated and explained is that there are 2 extremes. One is devotion to sensual pleasure, kama sukhalikanu yoga. The other is self-mortification, atta kilamatani yoga. Now, when you hear this, you might think that doesn't apply to me. But that is not what it is. It applies to everyone. This thing called Kamasukhalikanu yoga is to be carried away by our emotions. That means there are 2 important parts of the mind that the Buddha spoke of, but most Buddhists don't even know about it. And that is, one is our emotional part, and the other is our thinking part. The thinking part is what the Buddha called Mano. The emotional part is what the Buddha called Chitta. Today, most Buddhists think that Mano and Chitta are having the same meaning. That is not correct. There was a psychologist by the name of Sigmund Freud. You may have heard about him. He divided the mind into 3 parts. He called these 3 parts the id, the ego, and the superego. It refers to the emotions. what the Buddha called Chitta. The word ego referred to the thinking part, which the Buddha called Mano. But he added another part, called superego. That is not an unnecessary part. The Buddha also spoke about that. This is what the Buddha called Hiri-ottappa. Hiri-ottappa means today translated as fear and shame. But that is not just fear and shame. It is what is today called in the West as the conscience. The conscience. That is what makes us feel guilty. You know, when the child when you were a child and when everyone was a child, you have to be looked after by an adult. Because the child might go and do various things without knowing what is right and wrong. Sometimes the child might put something into the mouth and maybe that is something bad, like maybe even a nail or something. And so the babysitter has to go and watch the child, and if something wrong is done, that has to be removed. Or the child might go and touch a flame. Or might even take a knife and cut himself or herself. So this is why a babysitter is necessary to look after the child. And the child is taught what should be done and what should not be done. Don't do this. Do this. Why is that? You see, when the child is growing, at the beginning, the child is not able to understand the world. The child is not aware of the world properly. And is not able to find out what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. But as the child grows up and becomes, at least comes to about the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, then the child begins to know what is good and bad to some extent. Sometimes you have to grow up till about 16, 17, 18, till you come to know fully what are the right things to do and what are the wrong things to do. So during this childhood period, someone has to be looking after this child. So when this child is looked after and given the ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, that enters the mind and it remains in the mind even when you grow up. And when you become an adult, at least when you pass 16, 17, 18, 19, now today 18 is supposed to be the time when a person becomes an adult. Now till that time, the child has to be taught. And these things that are being taught in terms of what is good and bad, that remains in the mind, and that becomes the conscience. So whenever you do something, if you are doing the wrong things, you begin to feel guilty. Oh, I have done something wrong. And some children who have been brought up very strictly by their parents, they begin to feel very guilty when they do something wrong. This feeling of guilt helps the person to discipline himself or herself. So that discipline is necessary. But as the child becomes an adult, that person begins to be able to think and reason out. And then you begin to sometimes think what you were taught as bad may not be so bad, and it may be okay to do certain things. And then you might do something which earlier you considered to be wrong. You might do something because you think it is okay. Yet, you begin to feel that guilt. Although you did it, you still feel guilty. This is the problem. And as a child, sometimes when the child becomes emotionally aroused, like maybe the child becomes very angry, And because the child is angry, the child might hit the mother, or maybe doing something which is considered to be wrong, even as a child. Or it may be connected with some sexual desires a child might have. And that also can create a guilt feeling. So the child is not able to gain control over these emotions. The child doesn't know how to control the emotion. Even if the child knows that it is bad or wrong, still the child doesn't know how to control the emotion. So what does the child do? The child becomes frightened of that emotion. And because of the fear, and the child doesn't know how to handle that, the child tries to forget it. Forget means to imagine that it is not there. And that is not done consciously. It happens unconsciously. Because the child doesn't know how to handle it. That is what Sigmund Freud called repression. Repression is simply something that happens unconsciously. And as the child grows up into adulthood, and as an adult, these things tend to be forgotten because they are repressed. But they come up in different forms. What is repressed has not been really dealt with because it has got forgotten. That means your own mind is now throwing it out of the mind without your knowledge. But those things that have been repressed in this way come up in different forms. It can come up in the form of a disease, or it can come up in the form of some uncommon behavior. And that is what Freud so as mental sickness. Even a thing like, say, stammering, which we normally come across, stammering, is a thing like that. Or it can come in the form of something like shyness or lack of confidence. And various things like that. There are various kinds of phobias, which are fears. So this is what Sigmund Freud spoke about. These are the problems that the Buddha was trying to deal with. When he spoke about these two extreme ways of living, one is to be carried away by the emotions, and the other is suppression or repression. So the Buddha pointed out that instead of being carried away by these two extreme ways of living, there is a middle path. And he showed the middle path, which is today known as the Noble Eightfold Path. Although it is called the Noble Eightfold Path, it's not just a noble way of doing things. It is how people begin to become civilized. When people become civilized, they learn to gain control over their emotions. For example, even if you are angry, you don't go to speak angry words. You don't go to fight with people. And you learn to speak nicely or in a good way, even if you are angry. Or you might, instead of going to fight, you might try to act in a good way. That is being civilized. But that civilized way of living is not something that happens unconsciously. That is consciously done. That being conscious and acting in a civilized way is what is called practicing the 5 precepts. When we speak of the 5 precepts, we are really talking about civilized behavior. That is the important thing to understand. These are not simply rules laid down by the Buddha. To practice, and if you don't practice, you will go to hell, or that if you practice it, you can go to heaven. This is how Buddhism is taught today. But that is not what Buddhism is. The basis of the 5 precepts is what is called metta or maitri. Metta means to recognize the importance of other people. We are supposed to be human beings. But although we are human beings, or we like to say we are human beings, we are also animals according to modern scientific way of thinking. And like all other animals, we also get angry. We become greedy for things. We are carried away by emotions. These emotions are mainly the things that make us animals. What is special about the human being is the ability to think and reason out. That thinking part, which is called Mano, is what is special for the human being. And it is because of this thinking part that we can understand the world, understand what is life, understand that there are other people in this world, and we should respect their lives also. We should not think only I should live, let the others go to hell. We don't think like that. This is because we have this ability to think and reason out. We are living in a society. We are not living alone. And because we are living with other people, we have to live in a friendly way. That means we should be able to tolerate other people, and we should be able to act kindly towards others. If we begin to act kindly to other people will act kindly to us. If we don't act kindly to other people, then the other people also will not act kindly to us. So there is an exchange here. We help others and others help us. So this is why it is necessary to practice the 5 precepts. So 5 precepts is simply the Buddha telling us that we should be civilized. That is the meaning of the 5 precepts. But as children, Because children don't know what is right and wrong. Sometimes to get the children to do the right thing, maybe the mother or the father might have to punish the child, or to reward the child for what is good. So this punishment and reward is when you are a child. So even punishment and reward is necessary when, even as adults, you begin to behave like children. That is why there is a thing called a law. There are policemen, there are judges, there is what is called the courts. All that has become necessary because there are some people who, even when they are grown up, they behave like children. They don't understand the importance of being civilized. For such people, we have to speak about karma, the law of karma, and also about heaven and hell, so that out of fear at least, there will be discipline. But still the teaching of the Buddha is not just a matter of talking about karma and rebirth. The important message of the Buddha is to talk about metta. Now the first precept we recite as Panatipata. What is Panatipata? Pana refers to living beings. Pana means living beings. Pata means to fall. Atipata means to fall down, to fall to a very low position. Pana Atipata. Veramani is to avoid. Sikkhapadang means, of course, a training principle. Sikkhapada. Samadhyami means I accept. I accept the training principle of lowering the importance of living beings. And it is that attitude of mind that we are talking about. Not just killing animals. Killing human beings are also there. But it's not only killing, even hurting. Not just hurting with the body, it can be hurting with your speech and even with your thoughts. So what all this means is that we are disrespecting life. To avoid disrespecting life. That is the meaning of Panatipata, Veramani Sikkapadan Samadhiyami. And this first precept summarizes all the 5 precepts. Because stealing is also a way of disrespecting others. Even sexual or even sensual misconduct is also disrespecting others. Lying is disrespecting others. Harsh speech is disrespecting others. Carrying tales around is disrespecting others. Even taking intoxicants and troubling other people is also disrespecting others. So you see, the first precept is properly practiced, you will be practicing everything. There are 10 akusala karmas that the Buddha spoke of. And all the 10 akusala karmas come under this one precept, really. So it is very important to understand that the basis of the 5 precepts is metta. Metta is to think, may all beings be well, comfortable, peaceful and happy. It is that attitude of mind which has to be cultivated. If that is properly cultivated, there will be no crime in the world. There will be no wars in the world. There will be no terrorism in the world. There will be peace and happiness in the world. We find people seeking happiness. But how many people are happy? Why are people not happy? Because people are not able to control their emotions. Because all our emotions, whether it comes in the form of love or hate or fears or worries, they are all self-centered. That self-centeredness is what the Buddha called Moha. The Buddha spoke of these emotions in three forms: Lobha, Dosa and Moha. Lobha is what we call love or lust or passion. That is Lobha. Dosa is the hatred. And Moha is that self-centeredness. All emotions are self-centered. And this is why it is necessary to gain control over the emotions if we want peace and happiness in the world. If we want peace and happiness in the world, we have to learn to gain control over our emotions. Without controlling the emotions, we cannot find peace and happiness in the world. This absence of peace and happiness has been spoken of by three kinds of thinking. It is important to understand that three ways of thought. The first way of thought is to believe that this world was created by a God, a creator of the world. This is the Christian way of thinking, or the Judeo-Christian way of what is called the Bible. And they believe that God created the world and after that created two human beings, Adam and Eve. And they were asked not to eat from a tree which was called the tree of knowledge of good and bad. And there were two important trees. These two people were created and placed on a piece of land called the Garden of Eden. And there were two important trees. One is the tree of eternal life, and the other is called the tree of knowledge of good and bad. So Adam and Eve were asked not to eat from that tree of knowledge of good and bad. When God did that, there was another bad person called the devil. That's what they think, that devil was a bad person. But this devil came and said to Eve, don't listen to this God. He asks you not to eat from that tree of knowledge of good and bad, because God doesn't want you to know what is good and bad. So, you eat from this tree, and then you will know what is good and bad. And if you know what is good and bad, you will be equal to God. So, Eve thought that is okay then I will eat, and she took a fruit from that tree, ate a piece and gave the other piece to Adam. So Adam also ate that piece, and now both have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. The moment they ate that, they began to be shy and feel guilty. And not only feeling guilty, God came and was very angry and punished them. And the punishment was not an easy punishment. They were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and they said, the woman will suffer by producing children in a very painful way. You will feel a lot of pain when the child comes out. And the man will have to go in search of food and work very hard in order to find food and keep on living. But that is only just a minor part of this. But you are going to die also. And when you die, you will go to hell and suffer in hell. Not one day, not 1 week, not 1 month, not 1 year. All your life you will be suffering in hell for this. That is the punishment. So you see, after that, now all these people are not only Adam and Eve is punished in this way, all the children who come after that, and the children's children, all the generations that come after that, that means including you and me, everyone will be going to hell as a result of what Adam and Eve did. That was the punishment. So after some time, the Son of God comes as Jesus Christ, and makes a sacrifice of his life on the cross. And the God begins to become worried about this. His own son is now making a sacrifice, coming as a human being and doing that to save the sinners. And so God begins to forgive the sins. The sins are forgiven. And the sins are forgiven doesn't mean the problem is solved. You have to accept the forgiveness and then start living a good life. And you have to believe in this whole story. And you also have to have faith in Christ. That means the forgiveness doesn't come to all, only to the believers. The Buddhists are not forgiven, so they all go to hell. So you see, the problem is somehow they are, this way of thinking is trying to make people good, get them to control their emotions. That is what they are trying to do.